Hey, Joe, how are you?
I'm good, Mark. You look like crap today. What's going on?
For those that are just tuning in, I just told Joe that I look like crap today. And so you decided to lead in with that. All right, let's talk about today's podcast. No one wants to hear about how I look. If you're thinking about watching this on YouTube, don't. Just listen to it. All
Or
right,
at least go to YouTube and tell Mark he looks great just so he feels.
That's okay. All right. So usually with these podcasts, we're bringing in people, previous clients, experts, people that can really shed some light on buying and selling online businesses because of their expertise, either having been clients and just going through that process or what have you. Today, we've got a little bit of a different interview, and it's with Jason Yelowitz. And most of our listeners, or some of our listeners, might know that Jason is one of our brokers. He's actually the most senior broker with Quiet Light Brokerage. And Joe, you have a special relationship with him as well, outside of obviously working with him. Why don't you share that?
Yeah, Jason was my broker back in 2010. I first talked to you in the spring of 2010. We went over the numbers and you basically said, Joe, it's in your best interest to go away. Let these trailing 3 months on your P&L fall off. You'll make more money. You're the only guy, by the way, that told me to go away and focus on my self-interest instead of yours. So you had me hook, line, and sinker right then and there. For other brokers that are our competitors, listen to that because it's so important to help others first and foremost. And that's what you did for me, Mark. You're still a jackass, though. Just so you know.
This is
Three or
firmly
four shows in a
established.
row. Okay, good.
Right.
Jason was my broker, took it on. I was one of his newer clients, I think, at the time, but he did a great job. I think I had an offer in 3 weeks. We had 3 or 4 calls and an offer in 3 weeks. And the guy that bought my business, the husband and wife that bought my business, actually, it was the shortest conversation, the shortest conference call that we had. And I hung up going, well, they're really nice, but they didn't ask any good questions. They opened with, thank you, Joe. Thank you for creating the type of product that you did. I really appreciate it. It was a digestive health product. And this particular person had digestive health issues and they solved it naturally, ended up running the Chicago Marathon. And he loved the product because of that. So you never know who you're going to connect with buyer-wise, but this isn't about me and my process. Jason was a great broker, and he's actually all of those things that you talked about with all of our guests. He's a very successful entrepreneur. I think he's written about, I don't want to talk about his net worth, but it's huge. Okay. And I make fun of him all the time for a variety of different factors. That's my other special relationship with Jason. We're rivals in many ways and friends and colleagues at the same times. He wrote a book on his affiliate experience and stories. He's built 7 companies over his lifetime, made millions, lost millions, and brings a ton of experience to the Quiet Light process. And is part of the reason we do things the way we do here, right?
Absolutely. I've often mentioned that Quiet Light Brokerage has been built really because of the talent of the people that are working with Quiet Light Brokerage. I would love to be able to say that I'm smart enough to build a company like this. But the fact is, people like Jason, people like you, Joe, Amanda, coming in and offering really good tips and honestly just being good people and really looking out for the interests of our clients has been what's built this company. And I just want to share real quick, when I brought Jason on, this was years ago now, but when I brought Jason on, I actually didn't want to hire him. I didn't want to hire anybody. I had already gone through that process. I had hired a bunch of people. No one really worked out. One person sort of worked out, but everyone really struggled. And that wasn't fun for me. It wasn't fun for them. And so I thought, well, maybe other people can't do this. And so Jason, who I had sold his business about 6 months prior, came to me and said, hey, I'd like to try this brokering thing out. I said, no, I'm not hiring. Thanks, flattering, but no. And then he came back again a couple days later and said, I know you said no, but I think you should really consider it. And I said, really appreciate it, but no, Jason. He came back a third time, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just scare him away. And so I took him on, and I gave him really difficult listings, and kind of didn't give him any training at all. And that's when I gave him your business, Joe. No, I'm just kidding. No, it was only a couple of months. It was only a few months when after he came on board that my eyes were completely open, and I was like, holy cow, this guy is killing it. He's really good. People love him. He gives great advice. And then it was in that summer that we started formed this philosophy of only working or bringing on people that have bought, sold, and started their own online businesses. This was really the recipe that we found to success, working with people who are entrepreneurs who have bought businesses before. And Jason, out of everyone at Quiet Light Brokerage, he might have the most success out of anybody. He's done a lot and is a super smart guy.
He really is. Anybody that's working with him, I think, is lucky. And he's really, a mentor to all of us at Quiet Light. And he's also our de facto disclaimer, or, anytime we have an idea, he'll punch holes in it. Anytime that there's a legal question, he'll go on the very, very conservative side. He's a good guy to have on the team, and anybody that's working with him, be lucky to have him as a broker.
All right. Enough of us talking. I'm sure we're building up his ego like crazy. If he's listening to this, we got to watch that ego. So let's go ahead and let him talk a little bit and introduce Jason to everybody listening.
Mr. Jason Yelowitz, welcome to your very own Quiet Light podcast. How are you?
Good, Joe. Thanks. Nice to be here.
For everybody listening, Jason Yelowitz was my broker back in 2010 when I sold my business through Quiet Light, as most of the people that are with Quiet Light have we've all bought, sold our own sites, but I think you sold one through Quiet Light, bought one through Quiet Light, and then sold it back and then joined the company as well, right?
Yep. Quiet Light's founder, Mark Doust, acted as my broker, and then I acted as yours. So
what's his name? Mark what?
Yeah. Hey, sort of a cycle of prosperity.
Look, man, you are the most senior broker you've been with Quiet Light, the longest. A lot of people know you, and your name recognition's pretty good in the industry. But still, I think they'd like to hear a little bit of background on who you are, your experience, and things of that nature. Can you just give us sort of a 3,000-foot view of your business experience and what brought you into being a broker with Quiet Light?
Absolutely. So I identify myself as a serial entrepreneur, first and foremost. I've started 7 companies. I grew up in Silicon Valley and came of age during the dot-com bubble. So my first company, I raised, about $10 million of venture capital. And a year later, I saw that company crash into the ground. And that really taught me a lot of lessons about lean startups, keeping costs down, focusing on profitability, and that kind of thing. And the businesses got progressively more successful, including one home run that I had with an online lead gen business. But the way I got into brokering was around the time of the Great Recession. I had bought some e-commerce sites from one of Quiet Light's competitors, and the experience was bad. I just felt like there were a lot of things that should have been disclosed to me that weren't, and I felt like it just wasn't a smooth experience. When I went to sell, as mentioned, I contacted Mark, the founder of Quiet Light, and said, can you help me sell these businesses? And the experience was so much better, so much more transparent. I could, figuratively look my buyer in the eye. I knew that I was telling him the good, the bad, everything about the business. And despite that, Mark got me multiple offers and got the deal done. And at that point, I said, wow, I really like the way Quiet Light does things. I want to get involved. And now I've been here for, I think, about 8 years.
Look, we all know Mark is awesome. Let's not talk about him on this. Let's talk about you.
So you're awesome too.
And the bathrobe millionaire, right? Because you skipped over that part. You
okay.
a big success, and you have a book that I make fun of often because I never got a piece of the bathrobe. Did you save any of it?
I could go put on a bathrobe if it'll make you feel better. But The Bathrobe Millionaire is a book I wrote in 2011, and it basically outlines my story. And really, it's meant to be sort of a cautionary tale because I screwed up a lot. I've made a ton of mistakes, but I've also had some really big successes. And the idea is to tell my story in a way that can potentially help entrepreneurs, especially first-time entrepreneurs, focus on what matters. So, for instance, I see a lot of people putting a lot of time into what kind of office should I get? How many people should I hire? This, that, and the other. And really, what I find is if you focus in an ethical way on revenue and profitability, everything else kind of takes care of itself. So, I kind of laser focus on stuff that works, stuff that's making money. And that's one of the reasons I like the kind of businesses that we sell, because in virtually every case, they're already profitable, they're already established. So that takes out one of the big unknowns that people have when they go out to start a business.
Absolutely. And again, we're going to focus in a little bit more on your experience and your life experience, because you talked about 7 companies that you started. You talked about that first one, you raised $10 million in venture capital. It was dead in a year. I know you've had one very large, successful affiliate business. So that's, 2 of the 7, 1 failed, and then we've got the affiliate business. What about the other 5? What's the success?
Okay. Let me see if I could.
How many failed out of the 7?
So I had 3 that I consider failures, and those were my first 3. It was the one where I raised the venture capital money. I came out fine from that, but you never feel good when investors can get their return. The next one was a pickup and delivery dry cleaning service that I had the bad timing to launch on September 11th, 2001. And as some of our younger viewers may not have such a visceral memory, but anyone my age remembers, that day was not the day to start a business. The next, I can't even remember at this point. The next one was a door-to-door sales company that it was marginally okay, but it wasn't good enough for my partners, so we shut it down. So at that point, I had 3 failures in a row, and I was ready to go home and cry. And the 4th one is the one that made it big. This one was a online lead generation affiliate business, and like you said, it was very successful. I started with $300, and the thing made like 15 million in revenue, and it was very profitable.
And you ran that super lean, if I recall from the book and the conversations we've had, right?
It was so lean. It wasn't until the business made the first 1 million in profit that I let myself buy a calculator. Before that, I had a free one that I'd gotten at the bank, and it was really small, and I could barely see the numbers. And I said, well, the business made $1 million. I'll spend $10 and get a calculator. And then a year later, I got business cards. So I really went over the top with the lean startup concept after the debacle of losing 10 million of other people's money. And once I adopted that mindset, profit, all the businesses after that have been successful to one degree or another. There was another internet business. There was a couple of real estate businesses. I would have to think it through. Somehow or other, it adds up to 7. But the point is, it was more learning about the process of what makes a business successful that helped me, where now I feel like if I start another business, it's going to be successful by definition, because I'm not going to waste my focus on something that doesn't show the early signs of, a good probability of success.
Now, a lot of what you do, in your role at Quiet Light Brokerage is talk to entrepreneurs, young and old guys like me and you, and you get to share that.
Very old too.
Yeah. So you get to share that experience, though, and that those failures that you've had and what you've learned from them. Do you find yourself? I mean, you're doing valuations, but do you say, look, go away, fix this, that, and the other thing, and then come back and you'll have a much higher value with your business?
Yeah, a lot of times I'll do that with sellers, where I'll help them identify 1, 2, or 3 things that aren't working great. I'll also give them a sense of the market conditions. And then one of the interesting things I've been talking to people about lately, we've seen a lot of bigger listings that are 7 figures or even mid 7 figures than we used to a few years ago. One of the suggestions that I give to potential sellers is your decision to sell could in some part be based on what I call, have you made your money yet? What I mean by that is most people, whether you're an entrepreneur or a line cook at a restaurant, most people have a dream of, I want to make one big payday, $1 million, 2 million, $500,000, 300 grand, whatever is big to that particular person. Once you've had a big payday, I feel that you can take more risk and wait longer on your next business. But if you've never had a big payday, I just bring them back to my own experience. With the business where I raised the venture capital money, you can bet that I had dollar signs in my eyes. I thought I was going to have a big payday. I thought I was going to have a $1 billion .com, and inevitably it crumbled into nothing. And when you get to that situation, you spend a lot of time thinking about what went wrong. And one thing that comes back is, gee, if I had an opportunity to sell earlier, even if I wasn't maximizing my full potential on the first one, I kind of wish I would have done it. And then you can hang on longer and take more risk on the next one. But if you don't get that first payday, that first payday is what can give you a certain quality of life that you're after. So the short answer is, yeah, often I'll advise people to wait, but it is situational. It really depends on their own business, their own experience, where the market is in the market cycle. And it's a very personalized kind of discussion based on what seems like it really makes sense for that particular client.
Well, I think personalized is the key word there. I know that, when I worked with you in selling my own business back in 2010, you were hands-on the entire time. Now, you were really just starting with Quiet Light back in 2010. Yeah. I think it was, one of your first 10 clients. Are you still, and I know the answer to this, everyone, I know the answer to this, Jason, but we're all hands-on. You're still hands-on from the initial valuation call to helping them with, calculating discretionary earnings and educating them on what it is, all the way to the very end and closing, right?
Correct. Now, one thing people are often surprised about is, of all the people at Quiet Light, I am probably the least technological. Despite growing up in Silicon Valley, I can't even code a basic website. I have somewhat of a grasp of financial statements, but I'm not an accountant. There's a lot of things where, I've got enough knowledge to be helpful, but I'm not the expert. I think where the value comes in is I'm really, I like to think of myself as a student of markets and economics. I majored in economics. I've read probably 100 personal finance and business books. And it's really more helping people see the big picture, helping a buyer figure out, is this the right amount of risk to take at this point in your life? Did you just have a baby? Did you just get a divorce? There's really personal things that go on that can make a difference. For a seller, same thing. Are you 65 years old and looking to retire, or are you 25 years old and you struck gold on your first attempt, and you've got bigger, better ideas? I feel like I've had a really good, sort of depth and breadth of experience hanging around entrepreneurs for the last 25 years, where I can help people sometimes see the forest through the trees that they may not, be seeing on their own as much.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about both buyers and sellers there. So let's talk about both, because I know you take good care of both of them, but what would the top, let's say, 3 things that you would, if you're talking to a room full of sellers, people that are building an internet-based business, possibly with the eye of selling it someday, what would the top 3 things you want them to focus on to get maximum value and a clean transition?
Okay, good. Excellent question. The top 3 are probably going to be, pick something which is sustainable. If it's a flash in the pan kind of a trend, you're likely not going to get top dollar. That may be a great business to run for cash flow, and you can just keep running it until it stops producing. But, buyer, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the buyer. The buyer is spending money. They may be taking out a loan that's going to last 10 years. You got to have something that, they've got a reasonable belief is going to exist in 10 years. So that's probably number 1, pick a concept that's got legs. Number 2 is probably run it for transfer, run it in a way that's transferable. If your personal contacts or your personality or something is too ingrained in the business, it's going to be really hard to extricate yourself unless you're willing to stick around and be a partner with the new owner, which, sometimes that's the right solution. But, for instance, if I had jasonyelowitz.com and it was a blog about, everything I believe, that's probably not a very transferable business, because, if someone steps in, they're not going to have the credibility with the readers that I would, unless we go to great lengths to make sure that there's a transition. So, concept is number one, transferability is number two, and then probably number three is clean bookkeeping. So it only costs maybe $40 an hour on average to get a bookkeeper to take all your bank statements, put everything into QuickBooks. Buyers really focus on the financials. They want to see something clean. They want to know that you're keeping good records. And if, it's not uncommon that sellers will, or business owners will, I'll call it fudge a little on what's a business expense. It's pretty common that I'll see things that rightly could be called personal expenses paid for out of the business. To a small degree, that's okay. But if a business owner overdoes it, or their tax returns look nothing like their profit and loss statements, or, this is the cardinal sin. I've seen a few where they understate their revenue on their tax returns, thinking they're going to save a buck. You got to understand, a buyer is going to look at the tax return and say, well, geez, the revenue on the tax return says X, and on the P&L it says 2X. Why am I supposed to believe the P&L? So you really create a credibility issue. And then similarly, it's important to realize a lot of buyers nowadays are getting a loan from the Small Business Administration, the SBA. And the SBA is basically a government organization. It's really hard to go to a government organization and say, oh, I cheated on my taxes with another government organization. So again, this is one of those forest through the trees kind of things. If you want to sell your business in a year or two or three, is it really worth trying to save a couple grand on your taxes versus actually being able to sell a business in 3 years versus not being able to sell it?
Gotcha. So longevity, number one, build something that's going to last so that the person that's taking it over, that, putting their life savings on the line, it's going to be there for them in another decade.
Exactly.
Good, clean financials. I guess that was number three, good, clean financials. And let me just say, make sure that we define that. That doesn't mean, not write off your car. That's not what you're saying. We're just saying document things, don't cheat. Tax returns, if it's not an SBA loan, that top number needs to match. Not every buyer is going to even look at the tax returns, but I guarantee you that SBA is going to, that lender's going to. And if it's a bigger business, a buyer that's more savvy, that maybe is coming from the corporate world with accounting experience, they're going to look at balance sheets and tax returns of that nature. Then
correct.
The transferability, without a doubt, you got to make sure that the business is transferable. Name and face and likeness. I've sold them that way. You've sold them that way, but it becomes a bit more entangled. And most people, when they're selling a business, are looking for an exit. There's a transfer and training period, and then they want to move on to their next adventure. Tell me about the buy side. When you are working with the buyers, they're coming and they're looking at your listings. What would the top three things you would advise buyers to do as they're preparing to buy a business and as they try to buy a business?
Okay, so it's a great question. One thing that's really important for buyers to recognize is that us, you, me, and pretty much any broker or competitors that are doing what we do, we legally represent the seller. So you need to understand that our job is to get the seller a fair market price and proceed accordingly. We at Quiet Light, we abide by a code of ethics. We're not going to lie to you. We're not going to do, sort of underhanded things, but it is important to recognize legally we do represent the seller. Now, that said, with buyers,
just for everybody listening, Jason, on these conference calls that we have as a team, he is the disclaimer king. He's always throwing a disclaimer like that in. Very good point, though. Very good point. And I have to say, anybody else listening, Jason's always busting my chops. So if I cut in and bust his chops, that's why. I'm just getting back at it.
Well, it's really important that, this goes back to sellers. You got to disclose. That's
Full
my
disclosure.
mantra.
Full disclosure. Yep.
Anything that's even remotely gray area about your business, say it up front, because not only is it the right thing to do, not only is it the legal thing to do, the buyer's going to discover it eventually anyway. And if you tell buyers up front, hey, there's something that's a little bit gray area, some buyers can deal with it, some buyers can't. But if you don't mention it, once they discover it on their own, they're out because they're not going to trust you anymore.
That's right.
So getting back to the question though, how do I advise buyers? One big common thing I see with buyers is too much focus on multiples. So the way a deal is typically priced is we calculate what's called seller's discretionary earnings. That's basically if the seller wanted to maximize profit, how much would they have kept? And then we apply a multiple to it. The multiples range anywhere from about 2.5 times seller's discretionary earnings up to about 7 times on certain deals, like a growing SaaS deal. I see buyers often obsess on that one number, the multiple. My opinion is focus more on the longevity of the business. If a business is going to be around for 10 or 15 years, it really doesn't matter that much, in my opinion, if you pay 3 times or 3.5 times or 4. It's still a really good cash on cash return. But if a business is much more likely to be, a flash in the pan and be gone in a year or two, there's almost no price you can pay that would make it worthwhile. So, and I've watched.
Would you take on a listing like that?
I'm sorry?
Would you take on a listing like that you think it's only going to be around for a couple of years?
So here's the interesting thing. I've actually discovered I'm horrible at handicapping what's going to be around for longer. But if I perceive risk, again, sometimes I'll take it on, but I will disclose. I will try to make sure the buyer truly understands the risk and that we're not dealing with I want to make sure we're dealing with a sophisticated buyer that can understand and accept the risk. And I'm going to price it low,
right?
A low multiple so that the buyer has a good chance of getting a good return on their investment, even if the business is risky. But I definitely prefer longer term, more sustainable kind of listings.
Okay.
I think you're safe.
Focus on longevity instead of multiples. Understand that you technically legally represent the seller. Any other things that they should focus on when buying a business?
So here's one of those places where it's important to recognize that we represent the seller, because there's a little bit of a conflict of thought here. My personal belief is, again, having started 7 businesses and had the first 3 do lousy and being fortunate enough to rise from those ashes and find success, I don't think people should bet the farm on a business. I mean, every small business, including internet businesses, is risky. I would put it in a high risk category. Now, it's one thing to bet a portion of your money, but once you start leveraging that and you take out a loan for 5 times more than you're worth, that's a much bigger risk. And that's my true belief. Now here's where it comes in. Because I represent the seller, I'm supposed to get them the highest offer that the market will bear. So if you come to me privately as a buyer and just want to have a discussion about my beliefs, I'm going to say absolutely don't bet the farm. But in a bidding situation, my job is to get the seller a higher amount. And sometimes I see buyers, over leveraging themselves a lot, and it's their choice. They're big boys and girls. They can make adult decisions. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of leverage. And for people that do take out a big SBA loan, I hope that your goal in the first couple of years is pay it down quicker than the pay down schedule, because it's just not fun to have a lot of debt hanging over your head.
Absolutely. Well, that goes back to the longevity of the business that they'd be buying. Make sure that it has that. So it's going to be around for a long time. Any particular types, not necessarily niche of business, but look, we want to get to know Jason Yelowitz. Do you have any particular policies on anybody that comes to you that you simply would say, yeah, look, my plate's full, when it's really not, where you get to make that choice in the position you're in where you won't take a listing on? Who are those people, and how are they rubbing you the wrong way where you just know it's never going to get sold?
Well, okay, so there's a couple things. If a seller has unrealistic price expectations, that's a red flag. I mean, you and I have been doing this long enough. We know what the market will bear. And one thing I've discovered is in the last probably 3 years, people that call themselves online business brokers have popped up like mushrooms. And a lot of them are so hungry for listings that they'll start naming prices that have no bearing on reality. So then a potential seller calls me and says, broker X told me that I can get 5 times my earnings on my 1-year-old Amazon business. And, you need to tell me the same thing. And I'm going to say no, because it's simply not true. And you don't have to believe me. Go ahead and list with the other broker, and you're going to discover pretty soon that what I'm telling you is reality. So in those cases, I don't take the listing. If a seller says anything that implies fraud, I will not take the listing. If they start trying to ask me, how do we fool a buyer into doing this or that, I will not work with them, period. It's just, it's unethical, and it's going to bite them in the tail at some point.
Yeah.
And then the final thing is personality. It's really important that sellers have a degree of humility. It's natural as an entrepreneur and a business owner that you love your business and you think it's great. The reality is, even when we get multiple offers on businesses, which occurs, with reasonable frequency, the buyers are usually not going to be in love with the business the way that the owner is. To them, it's more of a quantitative math equation. They're looking at what's going to be the debt service if I buy this business, how much cash flow does the business make, what's the recent trend, what's the worst month, and can I cover my debt service if I have another bad month? And they're going to be a lot more logical and quantitative about it. If the seller has a my way or the highway attitude, more often than not, a deal is going to unravel. So it's important to me to work with sellers who are realistic about the market, motivated to sell, have a good attitude, nice to work with, and really, it's got to be someone that I would enjoy sitting down and having a beer with. If we don't like each other,
why'd you take me on as a client? I don't understand. You took me on. That was back in the early days. You wouldn't.
Back then I was new. I didn't know any better, but now I would never ever work with you.
Check that off my list. Okay. Hey, we swapped. We have team emails and whatnot going on back and forth. You said something the other day. I'm gonna see if you can remember. Who is it? So everybody listening, who is it that determines the value of an internet-based business? Is it you? Is it the seller of the business? Is it all the brokers out there in brokerland, or is it somebody else?
Okay, so in my opinion, it's 100% the market. So much like a stock market is, hundreds of millions of people trading, trying to establish value. I consider Quiet Light to be a market maker. We bring together thousands and thousands and thousands of interested buyers with sellers. It's enough, and most of the buyers are pretty savvy, and most of them are financially qualified for a certain type business. So when I list something, I'll get feedback pretty quickly from the market. Sometimes I make a mistake. Sometimes my price is too high. Sometimes my price is too low. Regardless, the market tends to find its own level. If my price is too low, there's a bidding war and the price goes up. If the price is too high, I'll either hear crickets, where buyers go on strike, or I'll hear from a number of buyers who know me personally who say, look, Jason, I like the listing, but you didn't notice this flaw or that flaw, and for that reason, it's overpriced by 25%. And it's really up to the seller. Are you going to listen to what the market says or not? You and I, the seller and I can sit there all day long and talk about how great a business it is. The seller can definitely call 10 other business brokers and have them tell him how great the business is because they're trying to get his listing. it doesn't matter what my opinion is. It doesn't matter what the other broker's opinion is. The only opinions that matter are willing and capable, qualified buyers and what they're willing to pay. And if a seller is not willing to listen to that, because that's the market speaking, then you're not going to be able to make a sale, period.
Right. You do what you do based upon the, experience that you have, the 8+ years as an advisor with Quiet Light and everybody's closed transactions and what the market's doing to the best you can pick that price. But at the end of the day, it's the buyer that makes that decision.
And that's one of the things I look for with my clients is sometimes they'll want me to go a little more aggressive on the initial ask. And I'll say, if it's within reason, I'll say, sure, we can try. But you have to understand that if I get feedback that the market is not agreeing with this higher price, you're going to need to be flexible because, we're taking a shot. Sometimes we can get you more by aiming higher, but more often than not, if we aim where we think the market is, we end up doing better. And here, actually, can I tell you a quick case study?
Please do.
Okay, so this was also back in 2010. Back then, the multiples were a bit lower. It was 2.5 to 3 times the seller's discretionary. There was a listing where I had met the client. They were listing it for sale themselves on Biz Buy Sell. And I contacted them and said, hey, if it doesn't go well, I'm a broker, let me list it. And they agreed. So again, I was newer back then and I was more apt to let the sellers determine, what was what. So they got me to list it at 5 times earnings, which was way higher than the market was bearing. So it was on the market, The only offer I got was 1/2 of the asking price. And then obviously they turned that down. But then I encouraged them to listen to the market and we lowered the price to 3 times earnings, which was at that point the high end of the range. We got a full priced offer. So there's the irony and the paradox is when we lowered the price, we got more. When we went unrealistically high, the offer was less. And the reason is when you go unrealistically high, you often scare away the reasonable buyers, and all that's left are people that are going to hurl in lowball offers. That's and right. It makes sense. I did that myself. When I bought the house that I live in, they were asking too much and there were no offers. So I felt good coming in and making a lowball, and I got the house. So the seller ended up hurting themselves by aiming too high.
It's a great story because a lot of the newer brokers at these agencies that are popping up like mushrooms, as you say, they'll shoot for that high multiple just to get the business, and they overpromise and underdeliver on that. And ultimately, they're getting less than market value offers, whereas in your situation, you got a higher than market value offer. So listen, when it comes to one last question, we're running a little short on time. One last question. When it comes to multiple offers on a listing, and I don't know what your answer is going to be to this. The seller always says, hey, look, what do you think, Jason? Do you say, look, take the highest cash or take this particular buyer over here? It's not the highest offer, but it's different. What do you advise? Best buyer or best dollar amount?
Okay, it's interesting. So what I'm generally looking at is what is going to put the most after-tax cash in the seller's pocket as soon as possible. That's not always the highest price. Sometimes, if we have 2 buyers and one of them is more likely to be able to close the deal, for instance, he's a cash buyer versus the other buyer needs to qualify for a loan, the cash buyer might be a safer bet. There may be a higher probability of more after-tax money in the seller's pocket. There might be a higher price where the cash component is lower and then there's an earn-out on the end. Okay, that could work or it may not work out for the seller. But the reality is most of the sellers, the reason they're selling with us is they're ready to move on to something else. So do they really want to be kind of, tied to the business for the next 5 years, both emotionally and financially? Which
is very rare, by the way, any kind of seller note like that. I think I might have had one in the last 6 years. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's become less common recently. The offers have been more, cash based and kind of short term payouts to the seller. But there's another consideration which is the asset allocation. So what some people don't know is you're selling the assets of your business. When tax time comes, you need to fill out a form that says how the purchase or the sale was allocated. Certain types of allocation can cause the seller to pay long-term capital gains tax, which is lower, versus ordinary income tax. So that's another consideration. So we try to look at it holistically of what's going to get you the most after-tax cash as quick as possible. Generally, that's what sellers want.
Excellent. That's funny because it's the exact answer I would have given, because I would have gone with a little different approach. But
what would you say?
They're both right, though. You're talking about bottom line dollar value for that person after closing, which we do talk about. But the other part of it is it's picking the right buyer so that you get to where you're talking about. It's not just pick the biggest dollar amount. It's picking the buyer that's going to get you from letter of intent through due diligence.
Correct.
And into closing. I think someone with your experience, with the experience that everybody at Quiet Light has, we've all built, bought, and sold our own sites, is every deal gets emotional. Tell me if you disagree with this, but at some point or another, every deal gets emotional in due diligence, at the asset purchase agreement stage, and near closing. Your job is to set proper expectations and keep emotions in check. Most important job, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, choosing the right buyer can make a difference. I mean, if we've got two offers, one of them is a little better, but it's a first-time buyer with no entrepreneurial experience, versus a repeat buyer who closes deals has a history of closing deals quickly, is reasonable during due diligence, and has been ethical in negotiations, I might try to steer my client towards that buyer, because again, there's a better probability that it's actually going to close. And the thing I find is, because it's so emotional, if you're a seller, I mean, you could be living on pins and needles for weeks or months while a business is in the process of closing. So if we can get you a better probability of closing, it can make your quality of life bit better. So these are all things I'll talk about with the seller. When we're comparing multiple offers, we'll talk about the pros and cons that we perceive for each buyer, and try to make, again, a holistic decision, not one that's just like I advise buyers, don't focus just on that multiple. I advise sellers, don't focus just on that top line price that's in the letter of intent. Right.
Well, awesome, man. We're running out of time. We got to go. But listen, you are the most seasoned broker at Quiet Light. I appreciate your wisdom. Anybody that works with you, I think, is in great hands. You've been my mentor over the years. You better stick around for another decade. I don't know what we're going to do if you leave. So stick around. Guys, reach out to Jason if you want to chat. All the contact information will be in the show notes. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe.
Talk to you. Bye.